Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Davis, president of Furman University, and I'm delighted to see all of you here, so many students, so many people from the community. Welcome to Furman. Furman's Riley Institute, Institute for the Advancement of Community Health, and Shy Center for Sustainability recognize the critical nature of the issue of climate change. This conference is designed to bring the Furman campus and the Greenville community to a heightened awareness of how it affects us all. You're here tonight for the second evening of a two-day conference examining the evidence of and impacts from climate change. What you may not realize is that this conference is just one of several events happening on campus this year. Furman is drawing attention to this critical issue and inviting students and faculty to find their own way to engage with this exploration through course curricula, classroom discussions, and extracurricular activities. Many of these extracurricular activities are open to the public, and we invite you to join us. For example, our students are working on this year's TEDx conference, The Human Dimension, which will bring a focus to humans' impact on the earth. The Shy Center will host a Furman alumni panel and a Furman faculty panel to examine climate change in more depth. If you want to learn about these upcoming events and more, please go to furman.edu/climate change. Tonight, we look forward to hearing from our four wonderful speakers. You're in for a treat, and I thank you again for being with us tonight. I also want to give a special thank you to the A.J. Head Fund and Mayville Fund for their support of this program. And now, I'd like to turn our program over to our moderator, Mark Quinn, who will introduce our first speaker this evening.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Davis. Appreciate your leadership very much. Always a pleasure to be here on campus and always an honor to speak in front of folks here at Furman University. We began our program last night with an astronaut's perspective on the Earth's changing climate. And then we had a discussion with all of our speakers about the impacts of climate change and maybe how we could respond. How many of your folks were here last night for that conversation? We're talking about world-class leaders in their field, so I thought that was fantastic. Tonight we're going to continue that. We'll have former Republican Congressman Bob Inglis is here, who's deeply involved in climate issues. We're going to get the perspective of two coastal mayors about what they're doing on the front lines of climate change in their respective communities. But we're also talking about the link between climate change and national security. And I'm going to read to you an excerpt from the Quadrennial Defense Review. And this is put out every 5 years by the Pentagon as they try to identify threats a long way out. That's their job. So in 2014, they did so, and one of the main threats that they saw was climate change. And they say, I quote, "The pressures caused by climate change will influence resource competition while placing additional burdens on economies, societies, and government institutions around the world. These effects are threat multipliers that will aggravate stressors abroad, such as poverty, environmental degradation, political instability, and social tensions, conditions that can enable terrorist activity and other forms of violence." Let me say that again. Conditions that can enable terrorist activity and other forms of violence. Who here is concerned about terrorism on our shores or on other shores? A lot of us. It's usually one of the number one things Americans identify as the top threat. And now we can see in the military's eyes, there is a direct link between climate change, political instability, and terrorism. So that brings us to our first guest tonight, the esteemed Sherry Goodman. Let me just tell you a little bit about her background. Sherry is the senior advisor to the Center for Climate and Security. She served as president and CEO of the Consortium for Ocean Leadership. She is the founder of the Center for Navy Analysis Military Advisory Board, a group of 30 distinguished U.S. military leaders which she organized to become a leading voice on the national security threats of climate change. From 1993 until 2001, Ms. Goodman served as First Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Environmental Security. She served in the staff of the Senate Armed Services Committee. She's a life member of the Council on Foreign Relations. In short, she knows what she's talking about when it comes to issues that impact our nation's security, and one of those is climate change. Please help me welcome Ms. Sherry Goodman.
Well, thank you very much, Mark, and President Davis, Jill, Jackie. It's really a pleasure to be here with you here in Greenville, South Carolina at Furman. You see, I got the memo and I got the purple on. See? Okay. You didn't know it also happens to be the colors of my alma mater, so we have a lot in common here, and it's great to be here. I understand that you had General Bolden, Charlie Bolden, here last night, and he mentioned that we've worked together over many years, and all I can say is my mother should be here, so it's great. It's really great to be here, and I'm very excited to be here because I think this is really an important conversation for us to have. So I want to start, and I want to tell you the story about military leaders getting involved in climate change as a national security consideration. And so I'll start first with, myself. Mark mentioned that I did serve on the Senate Armed Services Committee. Senator Sam Nunn was chairman of the committee at the time. He used to say, "Sherry, we're going to teach you how to talk Southern." See how well that worked. I'll let you all guess where I'm really from. So, in that day, I wanted to work on the biggest global challenges of the day. My parents are Holocaust refugees, and so it was all about making sure that we had a safe and secure world. And in the Cold War era, when I was the age of many of you students here tonight, the biggest global challenge we faced was a bolt-out-of-the-blue nuclear attack by the Soviet Union. So I wanted to work on deterring the nuclear threat and nuclear strategy and policy. And so that's what I did in my early years. I actually wrote a book on the neutron bomb controversy and earned the moniker the Bomb Lady. So I went to work on that in the 1980s on the Armed Services Committee, overseeing the nuclear weapons complex, which included places like Savannah River, not too far from here. And during the time that I served on the committee in the 1980s, all of the nation's nuclear weapons complex plants shut down for environment, safety, or health lapses. The reactors, the processing facilities, and other facilities. And so sometimes I say my career went from weapons to waste, because it was then about how to address the environmental considerations, improve safety at the remaining plants, and address the cleanup of those facilities. So when I joined the Department of Defense in 1993, partly what I did as the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Environmental Security was to oversee all of the environmental issues associated with our military. And that, actually at the time, it really was not at all about climate change. It was mostly about cleaning up old military bases, closing some bases and cleaning them up, like Charleston was one of the big bases closed, and we've seen that that has been able to be economically revitalized. Made my very first trip there with the Secretary of Defense and Senator Hollings in the day when we looked at how we were going to move that community forward in an economically productive way and environmentally sustainable. So let me go now to the story of the military and climate change. So this story begins, and I think we'll start right first with a little video clip from let's see if I can get this playing right. Okay. Well. All right, there we go.
We built society on this assumption of climate stability, and that stability is changing. All these things we take for granted, they're not just givens anymore.
The just released report from the Pentagon, climate change and the challenges it's creating for the military.
The latest report says global warming is driving weather to new levels of extremes.
99% of my intelligence told me there's an ambush waiting for me. I don't get to say, yeah, but there's that 1% that says there's no ambush, so the hell with the other 99%.
as a member of the United States military and 30-plus years in service in uniform, climate change is what we call an accelerant to instability.
If you have an area that is already unstable and then has the additional challenge of water shortages or food shortages or a disaster that makes people move, then you can start seeing conflict situations.
Syria's deadly conflict, a full-blown civil war.
If we look around the world today, we can already see conflict and climate in play right under the headlines that we're reading.
A new study finds climate change exacerbated the worst drought ever in modern Syria as a consequence of human interference.
Fragile social systems just need one more shock to tip them over the edge into social breakdown, into war.
Failure to think about how climate change might impact our globally interconnected system is a failure of imagination.
The flip side of the climate threat is the energy and resilience opportunity.
As a soldier, we're always looking to have an edge on the future. We can pay now, pay later.
Okay, that's from The Age of Consequences, and we're going to take this story now in 3 parts. National security and climate change. Then we'll talk about international security, and then we'll talk a little bit about what's next, or the resilience challenge. And I'm going to start with the history of the CNA Military Advisory Board. Most of those military leaders, in fact, all the ones you saw in that last clip, have served on the CNA Military Advisory Board, which was organized 10 years ago. And I approached each of the military leaders that served on the original board. The last one you saw in that clip was General Gordon Sullivan, who served as Chief of Staff of the United States Army in the 1990s, and said, I want you to go on this journey with me. I want us to understand the national security implications of climate change. And some of them looked at me like, Sherry, what are you talking about? That's not what we do. And I said, well, let's just spend some time studying this. Let's understand the science of climate change, and then let's apply your experience as military leaders combined with the deep analytic expertise we have at the Center for Naval Analysis, which is the Navy and Marine Corps analytic think tank. Long-standing, been around for 75 years now. And let's see what we find. So we spent a year on this journey. 12 retired 3 and 4 stars, myself and our analytic team. And you see here on the side our very first study from 2007, where we characterized climate change as a threat multiplier for instability in some of the most fragile regions of the world. That's a phrase that has stuck. You heard it in the QDR, the Quadrennial Defense Review, many others. It's now a phrase commonly in use. I should have patented it. I probably could have done something with that. Anyway, those are our major findings from that first report. And in fact, the very week we released that report in April 2007, the Senate Armed Services Committee, marking up the Defense Authorization Bill, included a provision requiring the Quadrennial Defense Review to examine and include the national security implications of climate change. And that was in 2007. That became the 2008 QDR was the first one that then included it. And Congressman Inglis, when he served, and others in the House and the Senate, then continued to echo the importance of including in our national security strategy, our defense strategy, military strategy, and other important documents, the implications of climate change. And in 2014, we issued another report that identified those threats as continuing to accelerate. So let's take another little clip here. Okay, so we've characterized climate change as a threat multiplier. Then we went on in 2009, we did a study on energy, and we looked at how to address energy insecurities associated with our national security and also with the military's use of energy. The military has been historically the largest single energy user in the U.S., although it's less than 1% of total U.S. energy. That's a great historic poster you see there, but we said we need to lower our carbon blueprint. Then we talked about 2014, climate change being a catalyst for conflict. And let's just take it apart a little bit. Now we see, of course, you see in the hurricane trains that have come through the Southeast this year and the Caribbean, the military is the 911 force for natural disasters and has long been the case around the world. The other consequences we see our military facing is that we train like we fight. And with higher temperatures, we are increasingly seeing more black flag days at our training areas. In other words, it's over 90 degrees on a consistent basis, can pose health risks to our troops. Or where they deploy, particularly in the Middle East, we're now seeing temperatures routinely over 100 degrees. And in fact, all of the U.S. this year has experienced higher temperatures. Our military bases are also at risk. And here you see Marine Corps base Parris Island, right here in South Carolina. And you see that it also, like most of our military bases along the eastern seaboard and many communities, is at risk for a combination of sea level rise, storm surge, and coastal inundation. And that is going to affect the readiness of the force to be able to continue to use that infrastructure, train and deploy our troops. Okay, I think we have another short clip in here from the film Tidewater about Norfolk Hampton Roads. Great.
It's not possible to wall off all that water. There's just too much.
That water is the economic lifeblood of this region. That's why the port is here. That's why the military is here.
It's our largest naval base in the world, and we're not going anywhere.
Flooding is impacting all the bases in Hampton Roads.
We have to have sailors that are ready to go to fight our nation's battles.
Pretty difficult to get the people onto the base if they're driving down roads that have standing water on them.
Flooding is happening on sunny days. Constant environmental challenges degrade readiness over time.
The commanding officer has to turn off the electrical power to the piers.
It cancels church, it cancels softball games.
And the stresses add up over time, especially in a military life. It's stressful enough.
The U.S. military, they see the problem. The naysayers are jeopardizing U.S. national security, and they are jeopardizing the U.S. economy.
Facts are that the water's coming up and the land's going down.
Water is the water, and it doesn't matter what your politics are, it still comes in my yard, in my basement.
It's a challenge to our mission. It's a challenge to our way of life.
What's our plan that will allow this region to continue to operate?
How can we be an exporter of good ideas to the rest of the world?
That's a real opportunity for this region.
We have the technology, we have the knowledge.
How do you make yourself part of the solution and not simply be a victim?
Okay, you saw in there, most of those speakers were military leaders. The ones not in uniform, that was Rear Admiral Ann Phillips, and then former Vice Admiral Denny McGinn. So you can see that this film, I think, and the one before, An Age of Consequences, both available on Netflix if you want to watch the whole thing, or find it in a theater near you. Okay, whoops, let's go back here one. Okay, in North Carolina, the Dare County bombing range, you see a couple of pictures here now, visuals of how sea level rise and coastal inundation is going to alter that bombing range and make it basically unusable by the next century. Okay, the bottom line is you can either pay now or you can pay more later if we don't address these challenges right in a sensible way today. Okay, turning to international security, climate and conflict. How does climate change sort of affect our international security? I'm going to use this important report that was issued last year on the implications for U.S. national security of anticipated climate change. And you can see what it says there about the wide-ranging challenges. And there are really 6 pathways. And I say this is important because any of you students who are, or researchers who are looking to do sort of the next level of research, looking for an interesting topic, this report and the 6 pathways I'm going to run through here make for very good analysis and case studies. And I've got a student now working with me at the Woodrow Wilson Center who is applying this framework to Pakistan. So these are the 6 pathways by which climate change can exacerbate our national security. First, threats to the stability of countries by affecting underlying conditions, heightening social and political tensions, adverse effects on food prices and availability. We've seen this already in the Arab Spring, in Syria, where prolonged drought led to the rise of food prices, which was the match that lit the Arab Spring uprising. Of course, increased risk to human health, both pollution and climate effects. You don't want to have to be moving around Beijing and other parts of China during many times of the year. It will have negative impacts on economic competitiveness. We've already seen this in the short term as a result of extreme weather events, but long term is possible too. And climate discontinuities and secondary surprises, in other words, abrupt climate change, the melting of the Greenland ice sheet, other disruptions that could lead to very long-term changes. Now we're seeing a whole new Arctic Ocean open up that's changing that region very dramatically. We already have our first wave of climate refugees from Arctic villages because they will need to be relocated even within the next decade. Okay, and this is from a report released just last week. So this is kind of the newest news from the U.S. Global Climate Change Research Program. It's National Climate Assessment. And this shows that we are now living in the warmest period in history in modern civilization. And here you see, and this is very apt for this region, the rise in sea level and daily tidal flooding, which we saw in Norfolk, and you see along much of the East Coast now is accelerating at quite a dramatic rate. And then finally, also from this report, the good news is in some ways we're becoming less carbon intensive overall as a global economy, not all economies, but overall. So emissions rates have slowed, but not enough yet to fully put the brakes on this challenge. Okay, so what's next in terms of U.S. climate and energy leadership? Because I'm sure some of you have that question. The big Paris Accord, Trump's now been in Asia this week, the president, and then we have right on the same time going on the Conference of the Parties on Climate Change happening in Bonn. So, but I'm going to take the national security perspective. This is the current Secretary of Defense, General Mattis, who has said himself that climate change is affecting our troops where they are deployed and affecting the stability of our forces where they are deployed today. He's also well known in defense circles for having claimed that we need to be unleashed from the tether of fuel. This is when he was a commander of our forces in Iraq. And that's because he saw firsthand how being too tied to liquid fuels, fossil fuels needed to get our troops to the front was putting lives at risk as we convoy fuel and water to the front, and that we need to seek other solutions, other ways of powering our force. And that has led, to a whole era of energy innovation in the military as we look to use more renewables, more microgrids. This you see at the bottom, I love this one. This is a little micro wind device that is powering the Navy's Arctic Arctic research lab up in the Arctic. So the advanced energy transition is continuing, and I think that is the good news. I think we are on a path in this country. There's fits and starts, but there's a lot of innovation. We are a hub for technology and opportunity, and I think that is very positive. The challenge, though, is we need to put this in a global context when we think about energy, which is that even as our own economy is diversifying, the major growth in energy demand globally is going to be in Asia and Africa in coming decades. And Russia and Iran, as well as others, are poised to be supplying much of that energy if we don't help lead in an advanced energy transition that brings all of the energy sources and innovation to the forefront. So this is how, so that's one issue. The other is, how do we build a resilient future? The military is looking at doing it for our forces where it can, but this is not a problem that can be solved by any one unit, any one service, or even the United States military, because we are all interconnected. So we have to work as communities. We have to find community-wide solutions. And the innovation really is occurring, to me now, having worked on this in Washington for many years. I see a lot of the innovation happening at the state and local level, at our military bases and communities around the country, in laboratories, in private industry, in research labs. And I think that's very important. And I'll leave you in the last couple slides where I think some of the very important innovation, certainly that's coming out of universities and our research facilities, going to come in the near term, which is improving our predictive capability for these extreme weather events and disruptive weather and water events and things like Arctic sea ice conditions. We are getting much closer in many areas, now being able to take advantage of big data analytics, more improved data, AI. So these forecasting and these other tools that are coming along out of our research labs really need to get put into operational practice. And that's going to help us with a lot of these challenges that you see here. And so if we bring it all together, and even if you're skeptical at the end and you say, okay, I still am not sure about it, look at all the benefits you get, even if you decide you don't want to believe in the cause. So I want to thank you for spending this evening here. I know that our time perhaps doesn't allow for Q&A right now, but I want you all to know, particularly the students, I will stay around afterwards, and I'm happy to talk with you and answer your questions. And thank you very much for welcoming me to Furman this evening.
Thank you very much, Sherry. Let me just touch upon something tangible that maybe we can relate to when it comes to national security, climate change. I think many of you are aware of the tragic actions that took place in Niger about 6 weeks ago. We had 5 special forces men that were killed in the line of duty, and there were a lot of folks wondering, well, what the heck are our troops doing in Niger? And let me just read something to you from Tom Friedman of the New York Times. He has studied sub-Saharan politics for many years. He's very hawkish on national security issues, but drawing that direct line between climate change and an actual incident that many of us are aware of. If you don't know, that part of Africa has undergone extreme drought in the past 15 years. The Sahara Desert, instead of getting smaller, is actually getting quite larger. It's creeping southward at an alarming pace. It looks much like the Dust Bowl did back in the 1930s. So as the Sahara steadily advances south, drought is the trigger, climate change is the amplifier. The result? A widening collapse of small-scale farming, which is the very backbone of societies all over Africa. That collapse is leading to a rising tide of economic migrants, interethnic conflicts, and extremism, with unemployed males having no other choices than to take the $50 to join ISIS. These are disenfranchised males, they're jobless, they have no future, What future do they have? Is it extremism? $50 a month to join ISIS. Think about that for a second, drawing that straight line between our troops and climate security. I'm going to transition over here so we can have a conversation with our two mayors. On the far end, we have Billy Kaiserling. We have Mayor Phil Stoddard, who is from Miami, South Miami. Mr. Kaiserling is from Beaufort. Hold on just a moment. First of all, thank you, gentlemen, for being here tonight. We appreciate that. Turn that on if you would, please. There you go. Green button. There you go. Perfect.
This comes to life.
Here you go.
Just wanted to reflect on something I heard this evening. You know, my dad worked for the CIA back in the 1970s. He was the first anthropologist they ever hired. And he told me when I was probably, actually my mom told me, which meant she heard it from him, when I was probably 15 or 16, that drought was going to be the big creator of instability and terrorism in the world. And he was watching Africa. That's what he studied. He studied the tribal contract systems of agriculture and trade. And he predicted what was going to happen. And that was before they knew about climate change, but they knew that desertification was increasing.
Right.
And he predicted that was going to be the great source of instability and revolutions and terrorism in the world.
Well, let me start just backing up here a bit, how these two gentlemen came to be here, because one, we do have a natural politician on the end, and I'll explain that in just a moment, because he comes from a long line of activists. But Mayor Stoddard, you didn't exactly come to politics in a traditional way. I don't know if anybody does, Congressman Inglis, but talk a little bit about your journey to be the mayor of South Miami, because it's an interesting one. It wasn't exactly on your bucket list, as I recall.
No, it was a total setup. I went over to some friends' houses to find out who the next person would be to challenge the incumbent mayor of 10 years, and I discovered it was me. And I said I couldn't possibly do this unless my wife was on board. And the two guys were out of the house like a shot. 45 minutes later, they got my wife back in there saying, "Phil, think what we could do." And that was...
And you're a full-time professor at this...
Full-time professor, tenured professor with a National Science Foundation grant. I study animal communication. And I'm running for my 5th term as mayor now.
But there was that point where you're looking around the room going, it's me. Because a lot of time we often look and go, well, who's going to take up the flag,
It's like,
right?
oh, Lord, it's me. And then, you know, and the other thing was that once I became mayor, I had another one of those it's me moments where Obama was just coming in and he was, you know, working on a national health policy. Nobody was looking at climate. Nobody in Florida was looking at climate. And I realized between me and the sun, there was nobody. You know, and you always hope your elected leaders are smarter than you, they know more than you, they're super responsible, they're super well informed, and they're doing the right thing. And what do you do when you discover it's you? It's kind of like, you know, the first time, you know, when you realize you're an adult is when little kids look up to you like a parent. And what do you do when you realize, oh my God, it's me. I'm the adult. It was that feeling.
Well, Mayor Kaiserling, you come from a line of, I would say activist is not the right word, but people involved in civic engagement. Do you mind if I brag on your mom here just a little bit? Harriet Kaiserling?
Not as long as you say that I made her.
Well, it's a fascinating story because your mom didn't get involved into traditional politics until she was 54 years old. Is that right? So she's down in Beaufort, and let me just tell you a little bit how she was described when she passed away in 2010. This is from the Bluffton Today. In the House, she became known as a champion of women's issues and focused on energy, nuclear waste, education, and the arts. Hundreds of wishes and memories were posted on her Facebook page that day. One friend remembered how she faced down bulldozers to prevent magnificent trees from being cut down on Coffin Point Road. That pretty much sums her up, doesn't it?
She was quite remarkable and an inspiration to, you know, to a lot of people who never thought, as Professor and Mayor was saying, there was a role for them in public policy. For a 54-year-old liberal New York Jew to walk into what was then a white male Christian group of attorneys in the State House was quite a feat, and to face them down over a period of 16 years. I had the misfortune of following her I
Took
ran
over
for the
her seat, right?
legislature, and I ran for that seat. It had been reapportioned. That she was a very partisan Democrat. I'm a little more moderate, but I got elected as a write-in or as a petition candidate because I didn't care for the parties. But she was fabulous, and she set the tone for so much working with Dick Riley on the regional compacts on low-level waste, et cetera. I could go on, but I guess even though I'm Jewish, it's not about my mama.
That's terrific. Mr. Mayor, let me ask you about the front lines of climate change in your neighborhood.
Which Mr. Mayor is this?
I'm talking to you, Phil.
Oh.
As we think about sunny days in Charleston sometimes during the king tides, and of course, that's the part of the year when the Earth is gravitational pull of the moon is much larger than it might otherwise be. Sometimes it floods on sunny days in downtown Charleston, and I think you might experience the same thing in your neighborhood. Is that true?
Yeah, there's a park that my wife and I like to bike over to. My daughter doesn't like to bicycle because her parents do that. Except when she's not with us. But yeah, we bike over there, and we do climate documentaries over there because you get water up to here pretty reliably on the king tide. I've got a little app on my phone that predicts it, and so when the journalists call and say, yeah, well, come on over in this time and this day, and we'll get you good video of what's going on. This year we happened to have a hurricane pass about the same time, and much like Hurricane Sandy did it took out my favorite restaurant. They usually get water lapping at the door, and this time it was over the top of the kitchen counters.
And to be honest, it's always bad. Things could have been much worse.
We were looking into the teeth of a Cat 4 storm when the county issued evacuation orders for my city and the regions around it. I actually got on the phone with the county emergency manager and said, this kind of came out of the blue because I was talking to the governor last night and they didn't mention it. And they said, well, the National Hurricane Center has done the modeling, and you guys are getting storm surge. So I said, can I see the modeling? They sent it to me. And what I found, it was exactly what I expected. It was what we call the transverse glades that were going to flood. I happen to live on one. So I took those maps and I overlaid the street grid and sent it out to my residents because most of them did not have to evacuate. It was a bad call by the county, a very coarse kind of call. So some people did and some people didn't. But it comes down to, this is something I learned in the last hurricane, is what people are the most desperate for is good information.
Indeed.
They want to know. And so
even if the news isn't good, they want to know.
They want some certainty. And this comes down to the same thing of wanting to know someone is up there paying attention who knows more than you do. And that becomes our role. We can't always fix your problems, but we can explain them to you probably more clearly than anybody else. And that's, maybe when you can't solve people's problems, at least telling them, what the parameters are so they can solve it themselves becomes the job of guys like us.
Mayor Carzeline, one of the reasons why Beaufort is so attractive and so beautiful is that it is surrounded by water.
Underwater. Yeah. 60% underwater at high tide and 40% at low tide. Mm-hmm. If you fly over, that's all of Beaufort County, including Hilton Head. It's fabulous.
Now, you've lived there your whole life.
You said, wait a second, you said underwater at high tides?
Mm-hmm. No, the marshlands and the wetlands.
Yeah, is that the highest in the country now?
I don't know.
I don't know a county that's higher.
Yeah, we got plenty of highland. We do not have your problems, thank goodness.
Oh.
We are not even at the point.
You got a hill.
My problem, we do have a hill.
Yes.
But my problem, the irony, I think this whole conversation, because I've been traveling and listening and talking and trying to learn. I'm not a scientist, and I don't talk about climate change. I talk about what happened to my neighbor's dock or what happened during the hurricane, things that people can understand and can't deny. But there's so many paradoxes in what we're doing in terms of the country really understanding. If you read about the flood insurance program, the last couple of days, this whole question of flood insurance, what are we going to do? The system's broken. On the other hand, we're having people winning fights to not move the critical line because they're going to build the beach back up. You look at all the money that's spent on infrastructure. I sit with traffic engineers down on the southern part of our county, and they're concerned about how people are going to evacuate Hilton Head Island. and which during Matthew was probably more than half underwater.
Absolutely.
And I say, well, what if there's no Hilton Head Island to evacuate? And they said, well, that's not part of our contract. So we're doing so many discombobulated things.
It's cognitive dissonance.
And I say that in my area, because except for these last two storms, we've had the king tides, and our seawall at the park is broached every now and then, and we get some water in some yards and tidal creeks. But it's almost like we're diabetics in denial. The biggest problem in solving and treating a diabetic is getting to accept the problem that they have a disease. Because if they accept it, they can begin to treat it. But I have so many deniers. If we took Sherry Goodman's presentation to Beaufort, South Carolina, where I've got 3, she missed the Naval Hospital. It's so small and not significant. But we have the F-35s, the most advanced, and it's the National Training Center at the air station, and we train all of the female Marines at Parris Island and the East Coast Marines at Parris Island, 2 absolutely critical bases, and you saw the whole coastline. How many hundreds of thousands of dollars? How much did we panic during BRAC? Yet when I say Parris Island, the base realignment, when they were closing bases and we spent hundreds of thousands of dollars. We went to Washington, we lobbied, we cared. But now when they can't imagine, even though know how low Parris Island is. I mean, it will be under. We look at 2,100, about 3 feet, and we can, through our community effort, if we can find the resources, but I'm a very small, we were talking in the car about ability to bond. I couldn't bond enough given the constraints of our state law, plus the ability to repay the bonds. But we've got to find ways to come to common ground. Let's integrate what we do with flood insurance, with what we do in reorganizing FEMA. I mean, is FEMA to help people recover, or how much should they be wasting, leading that balance over to mitigation?
And I was going to say, I'm a little strange as mayors go and politicians go, because I take the long view. And the long view is you talk to the geologists and you say, with this much carbon in the air, what should the Earth look like? And this has happened before.
Well, we know what it looked like 800,000 years ago.
Yeah, 800,000 years ago, the sea level was, 100 feet higher. And that was volcanoes that put that carbon up there, but we're putting it up ourselves. And so, in the end, I'm underwater. My city's underwater, and there is nothing I can do with 100 feet of water, or 60 feet of water, or 20 feet of water. Maybe you can survive 20. We can't. Miami-Dade County is gone. We're gone. I mean, we're economically destroyed with 3 feet of water, and that could come a lot sooner than we like to think, because the glacial instabilities is probably a little greater than the models are accounting for. So if we go to the other end of this whole thing and we say we're gone, we're out of here, one question is, where are we going? And so I'm starting to think about sister city programs where we create a sister city, like, say, Greenville, South Carolina, and we say, we want you to start planning to accommodate us, and we're going to help you out. We're going to pay for urban planning and pay for some of the infrastructure design work so that when we come, you're ready for us, and it's going to be beautiful and not ugly urban sprawl. We'll help you make a better city. So that's the long view. But what do we do in the short view? And you say, well, we could spend all our money, dollar by dollar, all our bonding capacity, et cetera, trying to, inch our way above the waterline, and then we wind up broke, because that's how it ends. Or you say, well, there's some giving up point, and this is what the Dutch are doing, what they're doing in Poland, what New York is looking at, and they're saying, there's areas that we're going to protect and areas we're going to be flexible on with respect to water. Now, Miami doesn't really have that kind of flexibility problem because we're so flat, but I think you probably do.
And you sit on a big bed of limestone, too.
Yeah.
Which poses its own set of problems.
Yeah, we're going to be done in by prehistoric shrimp. I don't know if you know about this.
That's right.
But the Miami Formation limestone has got holes the size of your pinky, some the size of your thumb through it, that were caused by ghost shrimp. So it's like everything in Miami is weirder than you think, and our great vulnerability comes from shrimp. So that's just in keeping with Miami's weirdness.
Mayor Kaiserly, you made mention of the Marine Corps Station, Paris Island. Difficult to imagine the culture of Beaufort County without the Marine Corps there. And I know that economically it is a huge engine for growth and for the vibrancy of your community.
Congressman Robert Smalls brought them there as the Beaufort Navy Yard. It started to grow. It saved us through the Depression. It made us extraordinarily wealthy community for many, many years, and now it is the single principal employer. The payroll, the housing, the foods, they are our biggest customers there, and they bring great diversity to a community. Beaufort, a lot of times people say, why is Beaufort different? And I said, because I had a different set of classmates every 3 years. And so I got to learn different people.
And let me just say, Beaufort, let me just interrupt you real quickly because I can speak to this. Beaufort being different in a way that typically there's more civic engagement in Beaufort than you might find elsewhere. More willingness to reach across the aisle and work with others. Fair characterization?
Absolutely. I mean, that's how I brag, got the Reconstruction era monument after 17 years.
I don't work for the Chamber of Commerce, but I do love Beaufort. And I do know that that is one of its enduring qualities.
You can bring people to Beaufort.
But again,
you know what? Just spend your money. You don't have to stay. We don't have that much room.
I know that.
Besides, but he might buy your house, so we can work it. We can work it out.
Not hard though to get the attention of civic leaders in your community when you say, "Look, this is the economic engine that makes us go." The Defense Department is vitally worried about the future of this installation. It may not always be here. It's something people take for granted.
Yeah, they don't talk about it. They're very. I talk to them about it, but they're very quiet right now about what they're doing and what they're learning and the testing and the teams coming and going. I guess they don't want to scare people or mislead people. Or like the military, very often they don't want you to know what they're doing. They have reasons for it.
And when you say may, you need to say will. I know we like to be polite and express uncertainty. I don't, because I don't think you're doing people any favors. When you say may, it comes back to what we saw the guy in the film saying. If 99% of your intelligence is saying that there's an ambush waiting for you, are you going to listen to the one guy who says there isn't? We're going underwater, and it will happen. And what we can't do right now is put the exponent on that logistic increased function. But in a few years, when they understand the ice better, they will. So, we can't tell you whether by century's end the water is going to be 3 feet high or 3 meters high. But but you have to figure out, like, what are we going to do? How are we going to deal with this? And at some point, we'll know how much time we've got. But we need to set ourselves a series of planning points, and hope and see what we can do to stretch those planning points out in time. There's things we can do today to slow down that curve. And if we're not doing all those things,
be specific, please. What are you talking about?
Fast as hell transition to renewable energy, because natural systems and human systems both need time to change. Rapid change is your enemy. And look at New Orleans. When you get 3 feet of sea level rise in one day, you got chaos and suffering and death. If you got 3 feet of sea level rise in a century, well, gosh, we can deal with that. We can do some construction. We can elevate areas. We can put in seawalls. We can put in pumps. There's a whole lot of things we can do. Floating docks, you name it. We'll figure it out. There's a big difference between rapid and slow transitions. It doesn't matter whether you're talking organic natural systems or whether you're talking human systems. We all need time. And so if we are not pedal to the metal on the clean energy transition, we are doing ourselves a huge disservice.
Your conversations with your constituents there in your area weren't easy at first, but how did you win them over, house by house, person by person, on this topic that wasn't exactly popular?
People trust a scientist.
That kind of was your secret weapon, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, still is. You just talk frankly about this stuff, and people come out and say, thank goodness someone is calling it straight. I got a few people who, I got this former petrogeologist who says, with all due respect, Dr. Stoddard, you do know that climate change is a hoax. And he was going to offer me to let me read all of his books on all the great scientific hoaxes. And scientists, we wake up in the morning, writing grants to the National Science Foundation. Hey, we got this great hoax we want to perpetrate on the public. I would like you to give me $1 million here. Right. No, I mean, it's ridiculous. So people trust science. I mean, those planes that are in the air, that's science. These electrons here, that's science. Those solar panels, that's science. And now you're going to tell me that science is wrong when it comes to planetary systems? How come it's always right until it isn't? I mean, this is stupid, right? And most people recognize it's stupid.
I have to interrupt you because it's just a funny story. Dana Beach, who some of you met the other night.
He was here last
night.
Yeah.
Did a blog, and he talked during the both hurricanes. He referenced both hurricanes. He said, "Isn't it fascinating that you're sitting on the edge of your chair listening to the NOAA and scientific generated information about a storm that may hit you when it's coming from those same people who've been lying to you, misleading you, and who you've totally dismissed?" So you have the benefit and the discomfort of being further along in the process, because of the topography, the size. I mean, there are places, I'm told, in not South Miami, but in South Florida, that they're really ready to retreat. The drinking water has been contaminated with the sewer, and the human element in that you've got some families who went there to retire, and all of their assets are tied up in that piece of property.
There's over $1 trillion.
Worth nothing.
$1 trillion worth of real estate just in Miami-Dade County alone.
Yeah.
$1 trillion.
Well, in St. Augustine, the mayor of St. Augustine, Mayor Shiver, finally had to tell people in part of her town, we can no longer provide services to your neighborhood. You're too low.
Basic city services.
Basic city services.
Trash.
Can't do it. And sanitation. You're too low. It's too wet, and she's really unhappy about that. But that's just reality. There's no money to jack St. Augustine's backwater up into the air, and that's just sort of how it's going to be for most of places. And there's a few areas that are affluent enough. Maybe they've got military resources. Maybe they've got a lot of tourism economy that can build up a lot and buy a lot of time. They have enough money to buy time. That's what we're doing. But then there's places that don't have that money. Low-lying areas that are sparsely inhabited. You just don't have the density of people and the wealth to save them. And so what are these folks going to do? They're going to get wet. And the other thing is, you raised the question of flood insurance. Is it the responsibility of people in Iowa to make sure that my real estate investment is whole, that I don't lose money on my investments in Miami, Florida? Are you responsible for that up here in Greenville, South Carolina? I buy coastal properties and you got to bail me out and rebuild my house, and finally when I'm ready to give up, you're going to say, well, you're back in 2017, your property was worth X amount of money, so we're going to make sure you have that in your pocket when you come to Greenville. We're going to pay you. Is that your responsibility? I think your congressman would disagree with that principle. And I don't care whether he's Bob Inglis or anybody else. Nobody is going to say the entire United States is responsible for assuming the risk of people who are living directly in harm's way forever.
Mayor Kaiserling.
Continuing to move there.
Oh, by the bushel.
And wanting to get closer to the water and closer to the water.
Our own coast is a testament to that. Let me ask you, you made mention.
And when your house washes out 4 times, are you going to pay me to rebuild it a 5th time?
That perhaps Mayor Stoddard's community was a little bit further along than what you're seeing in Beaufort. Where exactly do you think, if you're going to take the temperature of your community, it stands on this particular issue?
Well, after the hurricanes,
After Matthew.
People are beginning to listen because they saw people in boats going through the historic landmark district, one of only 3,
right,
which we treasure, which drives value in our community. Once the military begins to talk out loud, or people second guess them and realize that your basic industry has the potential to disappear. You know, during the BRAC, people go nuts in Beaufort. Anything in the world, flags on the cars, bumper stickers. We got to keep our military. So it's that part of giving them a kick and educating them. And unfortunately, for people who are ahead of us in the game, like South Florida, hopefully lessons are learned as we move forward. You know, using the story that Union of Concerned Scientists told me about that community where I jokingly said that, she said, we're in a conference in New Hampshire with mayors from all around the coast of the United States talking about this. And this woman told me later that evening that she's part of a team that was going to South Florida. And I said, you're going to go and try to help people figure out the problem? And she said, no, I'm taking trust attorneys, real estate, mortgage companies. Right. I said, are you taking hospice care? I was joking. She said, yes. Because that is how desperate, and as soon as we, hopefully, these little situations, though they're sacrificing, are going to help people understand that the sooner you do something, whether it's to stop it or, I would agree, slow it down, the better. And we just haven't been knocked over the head, unfortunately. And unfortunately, this is one because it requires you give up. Unfortunately, this is a world today, and more so today than it was yesterday and the day before, where it's about me.
Right.
I got a little sunny news about not giving up something. And that is that solar power now has crossed over the line where it's cheaper than grid power. And if, you know, I actually got solar purchasing cooperatives started in Miami-Dade County this past year. We're putting money into low energy efficiency. We've got a clean energy financing thing. We just took out $2 billion in bonding capacity. And here's the good news. If you don't have solar on your roof, you're leaving money on the table. A family, if you buy a house today with solar on the roof, it'll save you $750 a year. So you're saving money by having solar, even if you have to finance it. So finally, the economic forces are aligned with the climate protection forces, and you can make money. In fact, at the co-op prices, you make an internal rate of return of about 14% in Miami, and we got cheap electricity. 14%. Inflation protected, tax-free. Does anybody here have access to that kind of financing? 14% inflation protected, tax-free. If you
Who would turn that down?
I will put my entire retirement account in it if you can find it. My problem is my roof is only yay big. I only need yay much power. I wish I could do this for everybody because I'd be, you know, what an amazing return. But that's our ray of hope. So when I said pedal to the metal on renewable energy, you make money doing it. Twist your arms. Does anybody here mind making money, doing the right thing? I see one hand. This guy doesn't like making money doing the right thing, but the rest of you do.
We're going to have time for questions after this. I apologize. We have to wrap this up. Mayor Kaiserly, Mayor Stoddard, thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, before our last guest comes to the stage, I'm going to invite you to join us watching one of these videos here. If you were last night, then you saw Tony Bartlemy's series there from the Post and Courier. This one is entitled Chasing Carbon, where you have the ability to see the carbon that's in the air. It's ingenious, and it's something that's very, as Tony would say, one of those aha moments. So please watch this video, Chasing Carbon.
Our seas are rising. Our coral reefs are bleaching. Our weather is off the charts weird. Climate change is serious stuff. But where's the sense of urgency? Maybe it's because we can't see the main cause of climate change, the rapidly growing levels of carbon dioxide. After all, CO2 is basically invisible. But what if we could? What if we could find a way to make CO2 visible? Well, a company called FLIR makes a special infrared camera that actually sees carbon dioxide. We borrowed it, and the hunt was on. Here's what a car's tailpipe looks like to the naked eye. And here's what the CO2 camera sees. And here's what the traffic on King Street looks like. And check out all the CO2 from this bus. Ships in the harbor look like giant floating torches. And CO2 shoots out of airplane engines like flares. All this can make you wonder about this stuff. Mitchell Colgan, chairman of the College of Charleston's Geology Department, gave us a crash course.
What fossil fuels are plant material that formed millions of years ago. They contain that sugars and the other materials that has a large amount of the carbon. We burn that carbon in oxygen and we produce CO2 in water. And you're changing the whole heat balance of the Earth.
Okay, back on the hunt. Vehicles are responsible for 1/3 of the world's CO2 emissions, but power plants pump out another 1/3. Here on Charleston's Peninsula is SCE&G's Haygood plant. To the eye, its stack looks dormant. The camera shows something else. Farther inland, Santee Cooper's plant in Cross is by far the biggest man-made source in South Carolina. Every year, it pumps out 25 billion pounds of CO2. We add carbon dioxide in so many ways. From yard work to the types of cars and trucks we drive. Yes, as the camera shows, we are surrounded by fires. Enough, in fact, to trap heat equivalent to 4 atomic bombs, going off every second. So we live in a world of combustion, and climate change isn't going away. But at least its source isn't invisible anymore. It's as real as the switch you just flipped, the pedal you just pushed, and the breath you're about to take.
Again, Tony Bartlemy's work with the Post and Courier, fantastic stuff there. And again, that just makes you go, aha. There's one more segment to that series called Low Country on Edge. You can see that if you go to the Post and Courier's website, and I invite you to do so. Our final speaker this evening is somebody familiar to many of us here in this room. He's a neighbor, friend to many of us, a man who has the courage to speak his convictions, which is not all that usual in politics these days. Maybe that's why the congressman's not in politics anymore. Bob Inglis served in Congress from 1993 to 1999, went back again for another dose from 2005 to 2011, representing the 4th District, which encompasses some of Greenville. In fact, one of the reasons he's no longer serving in Congress is because he really did start to pay attention to the science, decided to really care about what we were doing to our planet. In 2011, he began full-time promotion of free enterprise action on climate change, and he launched the Energy and Enterprise Initiative at George Mason University in 2012. For his work on conservative solutions to climate change, he received in 2015 the John F. Kennedy Profile in Courage Award. I'm proud to bring up to the podium now former Congressman Bob Inglis.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mark. Thank you. Thank you, Mark. In 2008, the Inglis for Congress campaign hosted a victory party for the GOP in this room. It was a mixed evening because Barack Obama had won, John McCain had lost. We had won, but I had a primary opponent that year who had called me the Al Gore of the Republican Party. He didn't mean it as a compliment. The Great Recession was on, the Tea Party had been born, and Newt Gingrich had gone from sitting on the couch with Nancy Pelosi at the beginning of '08. We don't agree on much, do we, Newt? No, we don't, Nancy. But we agree that climate change is real and we need to do something about it. By the end of '08, Newt was saying, we don't know. We don't know whether it's real. So, Phil and Dr. Stoddard, where did he go, is a guy who is seeing it in real time, and Merritt Kaiserling is seeing it in real time. But Greenville is 1,000 feet above sea level. And I can tell you that the constituents of the 4th District of South Carolina didn't much think that it was real come about 2010. And they thought that the local congressman had lost his mind and had maybe gone and marched with Al Gore a little bit too much. And so things didn't work out for that guy in 2010. We had not a victory party, but a real sad gathering to mourn a loss, right? And so that's when I started this effort to go out and proclaim what was seen as a heresy in the darkest days of the Deep Recession, that now is going to be not seen as a heresy, I believe, because we're going to see that free enterprise can solve climate change. But let me ask you something. I'm going to ask you for audience participation, okay? You're not supposed to talk about religion or politics, so here I go. I'm just going to go right on in there and start asking you some questions, okay? A show of hands. It's sort of religion, I suppose, about climate change. Okay, I'm going to ask you to raise your hand, a couple, not yet, but just be thinking about this, whether climate change is real and human caused, okay? So there's two elements. So put your hand up if you think climate change is real. And really, you're welcome here if you don't agree with this, but put your hand up if you think climate change is real. Keep your hand up if you think it's human caused. Okay, so now, hands down again. Now we're going to go out to the subset, okay? I'm going to ask you to put your hand up in just a second if you think that Ronald Reagan was a particularly good president, okay? Because right now, my party, the grumpy old party that should be the Grand Opportunity Party, is unclear about what is conservatism, all right? Are we nationalist, populist? Are we libertarians? Are we corporatist? What are we? We don't know what we are. We're trying to figure it out. But let's go back a little bit. And I want you to raise your hand if you think that Ronald Reagan was a good president. Raise your hand if you think Ronald Reagan was a good president. Well, that's what I was afraid of. Okay, now keep them up. Keep them up if you think that climate change is real. No. You gotta vote only if you. I'm looking for the Reagan votes. Okay, hands up if you think Reagan was a good president, and keep them up if you think climate change is real and human caused. Okay, I'm coming to kiss each one of you, because you are the most important people on the planet, literally. It's not going to happen unless you get involved. Because, did you notice that there were very few hands about Reagan? In a crowd about climate change, the self-selection is for people who are already convinced about climate change. So we come to an event, we feel very affirmed, even religiously inspired, and we think the whole world is thinking just like us. And then let me acquaint you with a Republican primary electorate in the 4th District of South Carolina. It's a different story there. They don't buy it. Actually, Dr. Stoddard, they don't trust the scientists. They don't believe they have their best interest in mind. And so somehow we've got to change that. And literally the people that had their hands up for those three questions, Reagan a good president, real and human caused, I want to meet you. And I want you to sign up at republicen.org. And in fact, somebody's passing around cards right now. There are 8 cards, collect the entire set. They'll be worth something someday. And so it'll show you how to sign up and to be part of this thing called republicen.org. Because here's what we've got. And let me, I should back up just a moment and tell you how I've come to this. Some of you know this story, and I may be repeating myself, some of you, but it's like this. For 6 years, my first 6 years in Congress, I didn't know anything about climate change except Al Gore was for it. And that was the end of the inquiry for me. I had a friend that used to represent New Haven, Connecticut, which is where Yale is. He said in the U.S. Congress, he used to say that being sent to Congress is like being sent to Yale to take every course they offer in the first year you're there. So some courses you take pass-fail. I took climate change pass-fail. Al's for it, I'm against it, next course. That was the end of it, right? Okay, so I admit that's fairly ignorant. But that was my first 6 years in Congress. Then I was out 6 years doing commercial real estate law right here in Greenville, South Carolina. I was running again in 2004. As you recall, Jim DeMint had been in the House. He's running for the Senate, vacating the seat, so I ran again in 2004. Our son, Marianne is here with me tonight, our son came to me. He was voting for the first time. He just turned 18. And he said to me, Dad, I'll vote for you, but you're going to clean up your act on the environment. It's the first of his 3-step metamorphosis. His 4 sisters agreed, his mother agreed, new constituency is born. You know, those people can change the locks on the doors. You want to respond to those people. That was step 1. Step 2 was going to Antarctica with the science committee. I will tell you that a lot of times you go traveling as a member of Congress, you get in trouble. If you ever run for Congress, you get elected, here's the thing. Never go to a white sandy beach in a warm place when your constituents are cold in the winter. This is a bad idea because they will not like it. But almost nobody complained about me going to Antarctica. In fact, most people said, why'd you go there? Who in the world would want to go to Antarctica? Me, I went twice. It's incredible. In Antarctica, I saw the evidence that you heard on one of those clips, and that is that stuff that's been going a long time that we're burning is changing the chemistry of the air. And if you're one of the folks who are afraid to raise your hand because you're not sure about climate science, don't worry, you're welcome here. Don't object at that point, though, because you'd get an F in chemistry, because that's just pretty clear. Don't object on this next part either, because you get an F in physics, because the physics of light is such that, and this is what I learned in Antarctica, light enters, all the heat doesn't escape because of the presence of greenhouse gases. That science has been known since the 1800s. The place you can object is, do we have the modeling just right? And of course, the answer is we most certainly do not have the modeling just right. It's impossible to get it just right. Even with Hurricane Irma that was coming toward Miami, shifted in the last 24 hours 50 miles west. That's with our eyes on the storm. So we're asking climate scientists to tell us hundreds of years from now what's going to happen. Lots of things can be objected to in the models. But the thrust of it is a storm's coming, right? That's what I saw in Antarctica. Third step for me was something of a spiritual awakening in another science committee trip. Impossible, right? How can you have a spiritual awakening on a science committee trip? All scientists are godless, aren't they? It's just a... and so apparently not, because this guy named Scott Heron, who's become a very dear friend, I could tell when I was snorkeling with him that he and I shared a worldview. You know, St. Francis of Assisi said, preach the gospel at all times, if necessary, use words. And so I could see that Scott was preaching the gospel. I could see it in his eyes, I could hear it in his voice, it's written all over his face, that he was worshiping God in what he was showing me, in the glories of the Great Barrier Reef. And so later we had a chance to talk, and he told me about conservation changes he was making in his life in order to love God and love people. People will never know, because they'll come along after us. So I got right inspired. I wanted to be like Scott, loving God and loving people. So I came home to the 4th District of South Carolina, and I introduced in Washington the Raise Wages, Cut Carbon Act of 2009. That is a revenue-neutral, border-adjustable carbon tax. Now, pay no attention, ladies and gentlemen, to those last 2 words. Who wants a carbon tax, right? What a crazy idea, carbon tax. Yes, thank you very much. So a carbon tax, who wants that? Well, okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's revenue neutral and it's border adjustable. Let's focus on those 2 compound adjectives, right? First, it's revenue neutral. That means we're going to cut your taxes somewhere else, or we're going to dividend all the money from the carbon tax back to you. No growth of government. Problem number 1 politically. people don't believe me when I tell them that. They don't believe that the government is going to give that money back. And you know what? They got good evidence. They get good evidence. We're going to do this education lottery, and it's going to make education wonderful. Oh, the state legislature just cut funding for education. Oh, I see. We're going to put this toll on this road to pay for this new bridge, and we take the toll off. Bridge has been paid for 10 years ago, still tolled, right? We got plenty of examples of how government doesn't do this. And so we have a distrust problem right there, but it's revenue neutral. Second thing is it's border adjustable, and that means is we apply it to imports as though they've been made here. Right now, in the Port of Charleston, a sheet of flat steel is coming through from state-run industry in China. We'd impose the tax. China objects in the World Trade Organization. They say that's an impermissible tariff. We win based on precedents in the chemical industry, and within 24 hours, because China has an amazing way of reaching consensus, they would have the same price on carbon dioxide. Why? They're paying a tax on entry through the Port of Charleston that's going to Washington that they could have collected in China and sent it to Beijing. 24 hours later, they got the same price on carbon dioxide. And at that point, you have the whole world in on a truer costing of energy, such that now at the meter, at the power meter, and at the pump, we're seeing the true cost of energy. We're getting money back in the form of a tax cut or a dividend, and we're innovating. That's our message at republicen.org. So how's it going for you, Bob, now in these travels around? Well, is it building your coach? That's what you say when you're not winning yet, right? I mean, but we're building, we're getting there. It's getting better. The Great Recession is getting further and further in the rearview mirror. And among young people, young conservatives, young people of faith, we're doing quite well. Their parents are hard and their grandparents are just difficult. And so I've got a request for you if you're a student here tonight. Thanksgiving is coming up. Perhaps you're going home. Maybe Granny's going to be there. Maybe Grandpa. Maybe your parents aren't convinced about climate change. What we know from a lot of polling data is the conversation is never had. Families, friends just don't talk about climate change. Unless, of course, you self-select to a conversation about climate change, in which case you're in on it. So you're going home for Thanksgiving, and you're a student here at Furman. Here's what you can do to help save the world, is you can talk to your grandparents about climate action. And you can show them our stuff at republicen.org if they happen to be a conservative. One of the things that you'll see on our site is a clip of Milton Friedman on the Phil Donahue show in the 1980s. I'm looking around the room. There are some people here who are old enough to remember who Phil Donahue was. For those of you who don't know, he was a white guy doing an Oprah. And it's from Chicago, so it's very, very similar to Oprah deal. And so he was a liberal. Phil Donahue was a liberal. Dr. Friedman, of course, a father of modern conservatism, professor at the University of Chicago, a famous economist, Reagan economics advisor. And so Phil Donahue asked him, what would you do about pollution then, Dr. Friedman? And Dr. Friedman, wearing his Adam Smith tie, of course, he always wore it on television, said, well, you tax it, of course. And then he went on to explain internalizing negative externalities. I once said that to a reporter for the Greenville News. We need to internalize negative externalities. He stopped me. He said, what'd you say? I said, internalize negative externalities. He said, I can't put that in this paper, man. We write at the 7th grade level. And so the next day, Inglis said, and it said in the paper, Inglis said, reveal the hidden cost. And so that's how I changed it, to reveal the hidden cost. And so, you know, it's all about what Dr. Friedman explains in that clip. It's on our website, and you can show to Grandpa or your grandmother, or to your parents, or to Uncle Charlie, who's been fed too much stuff on some sites that he goes to get affirmed in his views. you can show them that clip and help them to see that it's all about fixing the economics. But you got to talk to them differently than a lot of people in the climate space talk to them. Because if you talk to them about the apocalypse that is upon them, they will eat, drink, and be merry. Because denial is a pretty good coping mechanism for things that I can't change. But if you talk to them about the power of free enterprise, and if you talk to them about more energy, more mobility, and more freedom, if you talk to them about an energy revolution that's going to rival the tech revolution, then they might start to get excited. That's what we do at republicen.org, right? We go around the country, particularly red zip codes, looking for conservatives to engage with on climate. We've got three folks in D.C., one in Wisconsin, 2 of us live and work from here in South Carolina. We've got a community of about 3,900 folks online, and we're growing that. We need to grow it to 10,000, to 100,000, to 1 million. And when we get there, we will find Republicans in Congress understanding there's a constituency for action. Because I'm here with a news flash that you probably already know, and that is politicians typically don't lead, they typically follow. And so once we get the band struck up on Main Street, they will step off the curb and run around out front to lead that parade where it's going. But they will not step off the curb until they hear that big brass band. And so we have to grow this constituency in the heartland so that they can hear it and then respond to lead that constituency. So you have something you can do, if you're a student here especially, is at that Thanksgiving dinner, have this conversation. Tell Granny, tell Grandfather. Really, it matters to us, Granny. We plan on living a lot longer than you do. And the impacts of climate change are going to be here. And no, Granny, it's not a plot, a Chinese hoax and conspiracy. I know you heard that. It's about just basic science. And yes, the models can be challenged, but the essence of it can't be doubted. But there's this incredible opportunity. And let me illustrate it. You know, in 1992, my first campaign, I had a bag phone. Now let me tell you what a bag phone is. I'm speaking first to the students here because you probably haven't seen one of these. I'm seeing some people old enough here to remember what a bag phone is. It's actually a cell phone that's in a bag and it had a cord on it. So you picked it up out of the cradle and you talked and it had a cord and you talked while you drove, or no, while you didn't drive, you stopped and talked on it. In this county, in this district, it used to be Greenville, Spartanburg, Union County, it didn't work in Union. It couldn't reach there. The signal didn't reach there. It cost about $1 a minute, and it was a major campaign expense, and it had roaming charges and something called long distance. You'll have to go to a museum to understand what long distance is. But there used to be charges for calling a different area code. And sometimes within the same area code, you had to pay money to call there. And so that was 1992. Now you have, most of you, in your pocket, a cell phone. The cost came down dramatically. Something that McKinsey missed a bit when AT&T asked them in the 1980s to project for AT&T how many cell phones would be in use by the time Y2K came. Because AT&T was considering going big time into the business. So McKinsey thought and thought and thought, and they came back with the answer, 800,000. Well, the only thing is, when Y2K rolled around, there were 800,000 cell phones going into service every 3 days. We need a mathematician to tell us what order of magnitude McKinsey missed that by. But I think it would be an enormous number of orders of magnitude that they missed it by, right? Now, in fairness to McKinsey, some of you will go to work for McKinsey, okay? The batteries were no good, the service was no good, it was very expensive. And it could be assumed that it wasn't going to work. Same thing on energy and climate. Is right now we've got complaints about, oh, it's intermittent, they're the sissy fuels. You know, we need, by golly, manly men to go get us some of those fossils to burn. And so, you know, the battery life isn't good, the solar efficiency isn't good enough, et cetera, et cetera. Wait until the market is the prize. Wait until there need be no subsidies, no electric car credits, no production tax credit for wind, no investment tax credit for solar. Just a level playing field where all costs are in, everything's internalized, all subsidies are out, and the free enterprise system is driving competition and driving the prices down. That's what we think is coming. And the calling that's available, especially to students here, because, you know, you've missed some callings, perhaps, you know, the civil rights movement, you're too young for that. It's already been handled legally. It's got a lot more practical things to go. But here's one that you don't want to miss, is this incredible opportunity, this incredible calling to light up the world, dark places of the world, with more mobility, more energy, more freedom. Probably won't be from central power stations and big grids, just like those dark places in Africa and India have leapfrogged us on cell phone technology, jumping over our landlines straight to cell phones. They'll probably operate with microgrids, solar, better batteries, microgrids that power their lives, reducing one of the causes of war, because energy has always been one of the causes of war. And the result can be that you can be part of this incredible mission to light up the world with more energy, more mobility, more freedom. It's an incredible calling. It's also, by the way, now speaking really to my GOP friends, it's an incredible opportunity to make an awful lot of money because we are going to make a lot of money selling those systems and serving our customers around the world if we do this right. Now, we have a competitor called China that plans on doing it before we do it. And I just think it's fascinating. You know, remember that border adjustment I was just talking about? It may be possible that China imposes a border adjustment on our products on entry after they do a cap and trade system that they may be working on. But I'm here to tell you that I know that it looks funny, particularly on the Republican side right now. I know we got a lot of confusion underneath our tent. But the mind is going to clear once we get through to the heart. And let me just close with that, because this is to equip you to go talk with Charlie, okay? Uncle Charlie, who's coming for Thanksgiving, or Granny, or Grandpa. Is you got to approach with humility. And you got to approach not being the know-it-all. And to tell you the truth, one of my problems in 2010, I think, is I acted like I was the smartest guy in the room. And I think that's one of the reasons I lost, probably, in 2010, right? And so you don't want to do that. So I had to relearn that lesson this summer at Tangier Island, Virginia. Tangier Island is going under, as we just saw on that film, right? Donald Trump got 87% of the vote on the island. There are 470 residents. He called the mayor, told them the island's been there forever. It's going to be there hundreds of more years. Don't worry about climate change and don't worry about sea level rise. That caused Starbucks to say to me, come go with us to Tangier Island. Here's the setup. Climate warrior goes to do battle on sinking island with troglodytes. Okay? There'll be blood on the floor. We'll film it. It'll be great. Off we go. Get there and find out that the mayor, who I had sized up to be absolutely difficult to deal with, is actually a wonderful guy. I had sized him up. I'd seen the advance publicity. He's got a Trump Pence sticker. He's got a Christian fish and a Star of David, so I made him out to be a Pentecostal Zionist. And he was on the night before with Al Gore and Anderson Cooper talking about how sea level isn't rising. Their problem is erosion, mayors, not sea level rise. Yeah, so I get there, and he's different than I thought. His wife, he and his wife had 2 boys. She really wanted a girl, but she had problems in pregnancy, so they decided to adopt from an Indian girl. So the agency in Washington said, "Do you want us to send you pictures?" And the mayor said, "Nope, not the way we're doing it. Just send us the first one." So then end up with 3 more. They adopted 4 Indian daughters. He said, for a while, Tanger had real diversity. And so this is a guy who puts osprey platforms out. I grew up, as Mayor Kosling knows, in Bluffton, South Carolina. I'd never gotten this close to an osprey nest. He backed his boat up right by the nest, and we're seeing 2 babies right there because he feeds them. And he says the parents won't mind we're here because I usually leave a fish for them. He names seagulls, and this one seagull comes back every year. He knows when it leaves for the season. When it comes back, he feeds it by hand on his boat. This is an amazing guy that loves God, loves the creation, and is a completely different guy than I thought he'd be. So I wrote him after it was all over, and I said, I came there to teach you about climate change. When I come back, I'll come back as your student. Because you know what? The people of his island actually like him. The people of my district didn't like me anymore. I mean, I got to go back and learn from this guy. And so what I relearned there this summer is changing minds starts with opening minds, and the opening starts with overcoming the disrespect that's been shown. And by the way, Starbucks thankfully changed the whole MO of the film. It's now a 7-minute part of their Upstanders series. You can see it by searching Starbucks in English. And you'll see this 7 minutes of this wonderful mayor. Still, they got the problem of sea level rise. But the conversation we had may cause them to start to be able to hear it differently. Because right now they're feeling disrespected by the scientist, actually. You'll see it on the film. They feel disrespected. And so what we've got to show them is some respect, open the minds, and get some changed minds. And illustrate, if I may, just one more thing, and then I'm going to stop. Is, you know, I mentioned earlier the guy that is Scott Heron, my Aussie climate scientist friend. If Scott told me today that, listen, Bob, I know you got to go to Atlanta after this. By the way, anybody going to Atlanta? We can save some carbon emissions. Everybody's going. I could get a ride with you. Tell me afterwards. But if Scott told me, listen, Bob, let's hike to Atlanta. Because I love Scott and he loves me, I'd say, I'm in, Scott, let's go. Compare that to a guy who asked me at a conference one time, did you buy carbon offsets for your travel here today? And I said, no, that's a scam, isn't it? Because I just read in the Wall Street Journal about how the accounting is funny. And so he turned to the guy next to him and said, that's what they all say when they don't want to be responsible. If that guy told me today's Thursday, I'd check the calendar, right? I don't want to hear any more from him because he's just told me that he's a saint, I'm a sinner, he's holy, I'm unrighteous, and I don't want to hear anything from him. So what you've got to do at Thanksgiving dinner is approach with humility and say, really, we are literally all in this together. So I know you've heard some things on Fox and Friends, Granny. I know you've watched that, Uncle Charlie. But let's sit and reason together. Let's be repairers of the breach. And let's figure out how to get this done and show them that it can be done with the power of free enterprise. And then maybe they can sign on. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much. Always love hearing from Congressman Engels. Thank you so much for what you have to offer there. And listen, I will give you $1,000 if you go to South Louisiana, where my family is from, this Thanksgiving, and talk about what you just talked about. Because I promise you, it's not going to end well. Love my Meemaw, but she don't believe in climate change. So let me just leave you with one thing here. You know, we talked an awful lot about the politics of climate change and public opinion of climate change. There is a fantastic documentary, Merchants of Doubt, that came out a couple of years ago. And I only bring this up because the same people who were spinning climate change are the same people that worked for Big Tobacco back in the 90s. When I went back and did a program on this for public television, Here it is, 1997, the year before Big Tobacco settles with the states for $300 billion. $300 billion they are paying out. You have a group of 5 doctors, licensed practitioners, standing, swearing in front of the Senate panel that there is no connection between cigarette smoke and cancer. They swore in front of that Senate panel. Now, maybe they believe that deep in their own heart of hearts. Maybe so. But looking at that tape and looking at what we know now, it is so outrageous, so brazen, that it just makes you want to cry sometimes. Same people, same artists, same folks making the same arguments. Merchants of Doubt, great film if you have time to see it. Dr. Davis, salutes you and Furman for having this year-long conversation, because as Representative Inglis mentions, you have to have the conversation or you don't move the needle. So thank all of you for coming out these past 2 nights. It's been fantastic. Thank you to all of our guests, and we will see you again next time.